Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Marion County Children's Services Agency podcast. My name is Elizabeth Moore. I'm the Foster Care and Community Engagement Coordinator. And this month is April. It's Child Abuse, Neglect, and Awareness Month. And I am here with Matt Coldiron. Matt, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Matt Coldiron. I'm the ongoing one supervisor.
Okay, and so we're going to continue to highlight the agency, some of the different roles and units here. And so Matt is currently an ongoing supervisor, but will you also talk about some of the other roles that you've had at the agency?
Yeah, so I've been an ongoing caseworker at the agency, an intake caseworker, and also an intake supervisor.
What did you do? This wasn't on here, so I'm going to ask you a few questions that just kind of naturally happen. What did you do before the agency or in between some of those roles too?
Before I came to the agency, I was actually a juvenile correction officer at the Department of Youth Services. And prior to that, I worked in a residential facility.
Okay. So what I really wanted to talk about this week was on call. So what not everyone in the community knows is that we are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So can you kind of talk a little bit about if I'm a person out in the community and I call the agency and they're closed down, what do I do? And I want to make a report.
So anyone that calls in the agency whenever we're closed, whether it's after hours or on a holiday, they're redirected to contact our police department. Our police department will then contact our on-call worker who does the screening while the agency is closed.
So I'll put contact information for the sheriff's office in the description and down below, so you guys can easily access that if you are maybe watching this after hours and want to know how that works. So what if I want to call and make that report? I call the sheriff's office, and then what do I tell them?
So then you tell them that you need to speak with agency representative from Children's Services, and then they will, dispatch will contact our on-call worker.
So is there like 50 workers that?
So no, there's only one on-call worker after hours, and then that worker will contact you. You'll provide your name and number to the dispatch, and then they provide it to the on-call worker.
Okay. So what does our on-call team look like then?
So the on-call team is an on-call worker, and then they have a backup on-call supervisor.
And so last week we talked a little bit with Katie, our screener, and she talked a little bit about the screening guidelines and screening process. So how does that differ if I'm calling after hours?
So that doesn't differ. So the on-call worker will get the information, the allegations, and then they report back to the on-call backup supervisor who makes the screening decisions.
And sometimes we don't make those decisions right away, right?
That's correct. It depends on the severity of the situation. Sometimes it's an emergency where it's screened in right away, then the on-call worker has to respond within an hour, or the guidelines actually give us, if it's not an emergency, we have 24 hours to make our screening decision.
So we can bring that to those briefings in the morning, just like any other intake.
That's correct, unless it happens on like the weekend. Like if something comes on Saturday, then the on-call backup supervisor makes the screening decision.
Okay. So I would like if you could give a little bit of perspective about being on call as a supervisor, but also as a worker, because you've been on both ends of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're the on-call caseworker, as soon as you get that call, you respond to the call. Sometimes, like I said, if you have to respond within the hour, then you go out right away.
Would you say we get more of those after hours?
For emergencies, those are typically, for when it's on call, when they have to respond within that hour time frame. But again, they don't respond until they've reached out to their backup on-call supervisor. And then they're the ones that make the decision as to if they have to respond within that time frame or the 24-hour time frame.
Yeah, and I think that something I'd like to just kind of stress, and really this kind of goes with everything that we've talked about as far as the agency is, yeah, the supervisor's making the decision, but it's still really a team decision between the supervisor and the worker.
Yeah, because the worker's the one that has all the information, so that's who you process the decision with, is between the caseworker and the supervisor.
Mm-hmm. So, as a worker, what does that look like if you're responding to a call?
So, there's really two ways to do it. If it's an emergency, typically what that looks like is you're responding and law enforcement's already on the scene, or you're responding to an emergency that's at the hospital. So typically they don't respond by themselves on emergencies. Now the ones that are non-emergency, they'll have the 24 hours to screen, and then they have 24 hours to initiate, to make contact with the party members. Mm-hmm. So in those instances, the caseworker will go out. If it's not a hazardous scene or anything like that, they'll go out and respond by themselves.
That's just like every other intake scenario we have.
Yep.
So as a supervisor, have you ever had to do like backup, like go out on some of those calls too?
As a supervisor, I have not, no. But I do know supervisors who have responded in situations when it's on call over the weekend, just because there's so many that come in. The on-call caseworker just doesn't have time to respond in a timely manner.
Yeah, and there's not really a good way to predict how that's going to go, is there?
No.
Yeah, like sometimes the weekends are just crazy.
Yeah, and sometimes you just get maybe one or two calls.
Yeah. So, do you have anything else that you'd like to add when it comes to talking about being on call or our on-call workers, on-call process?
Just when you call in and you're making a report, if you can be as detailed as possible. If you have a concern about one child, the agency also needs to know if there's other children in the home. And then any information that you can provide to help that would help the screening decision also. Then the basic stuff too, like we have to know, like obviously their addresses and all that, and who mom and dad is and things like that. So the more detailed they can be, the better it is.
Yeah, I'll put a link also in the description to Katie's episode where we talked about making a report and some of the information that we like when you call to make a report, because a lot of that, it doesn't matter if it's after hours, during hours, we need as much information as we can possibly get. And sometimes as much information as we can get and as much information as you have is very little. So that's okay too. As much as you can give us descriptions, as much descriptions as you can have. If you're calling in allegations of physical abuse, if there's marks, bruises, any of that is very helpful.
Yeah.
So.
And then also details like last time you've seen a child and stuff like that as well.
How long should I wait to make a report? Like if I have a concern?
If you have a concern, you should make it as quickly as possible. The quicker we can get out, the better the situation turns out.
Yeah, well, and some of the stuff we just talked about, like if you notice injuries, they're going to look different by the time we make contact. So it'd be nice if we can make contact right away.
Yeah, because then we'll be able to see still the injuries. Sometimes the bruisings are faded by the time we get there.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you have nothing else to add, do you have anything else you want to add?
Nope.
So I asked you a couple of times if you've ever watched my podcast, and you said you've watched parts of it, and I always have an unscripted question, one that I haven't prepared you for.
Right.
So I considered asking you who your favorite person to supervise ever was, but we'll pass on that one because I don't want everyone else to feel bad. Matt is my former supervisor. But what I do want to ask you is why, you even talked a little bit about some of the other things that you've done. Mm-hmm. So here's what I do. I ask you the question. I'll talk for a minute while you think about your answer.
All right.
Why child welfare? Because you have some of these other, experiences. You've done other roles. What is it that keeps bringing you back to child welfare? So while you think about that, again, if you have any concerns about the safety of a child, feel free to always contact our agency. Even after hours, we do have methods of how we can make contact with the family if necessary, or we will bring that back to our screenings, just like we talked about in that episode with Katie. And if you ever have concerns for a child, we would love to hear from you, so that we can make sure that we're doing our best to serve the community. All right, Matt.
Child welfare. So when I was in college, I always knew I wanted to work with children. I just didn't know what aspect. So in this field, I've come to love just the interaction with children, and then seeing them develop and grow as well. So I think that's probably what keeps me coming back, and to see how they progress into young adults.
Yeah. Awesome.
So,
Well, thanks, Matt.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate your time. Matt was a little reluctant to come on. He's probably going to be my first guest who says, that was good. I don't think we need to do this again. If you have any questions or any ideas for future episodes of the podcast, feel free to contact me. I'll have my information down below. And as always, have a great week. Thanks.
thank you.